The name of the person about whom the story is told is Moon Kwan. Now in Korea you say the family name first, so his family name was Moon, but all his friends called him Ikwan. Ikwan grew up in a small village just north of the border of North Korea, in Manchuria. And his family had fled there because at that time Japan occupied the peninsula of Korea and was treating people rather badly. So Ikwan's family moved north of the border of North Korea and formed this little community where they tried to live in peace, applying the wisdom of their traditions, wisdom of the Taoist and Confucianist and Buddhist traditions. As they lived, however, there came, or perhaps it was even unconscious, something that they were missing. And so it was with surprise and some joy one day that a rather odd stranger appeared in their midst. He was dressed in black clothes from head to foot, with a strange hat and a long bushy beard. He came from a far-off land, Canada. And he had a message about somebody that they'd never heard of before, a person named Jesus Christ. Well, the people in the village received the message very gladly. And Moon Kwan's mother was especially struck, and she decided that here was a message presented in a Bible written in their own language. She decided to be the first woman in the village to learn how to read the message and to teach reading and writing to others in her village. Ikwan's father became so inspired by the message, he decided to travel to that far-off country, Canada, to study to become a minister. And the only thing bad that can be said about that decision was that he decided to go to Emmanuel College instead of St. Andrews. For all those at Emmanuel College who are going to watch this, I am at St. Andrews. Ikwan saw his parents growing up as Christian leaders, and he decided that he wanted to be one too. And so when he got the chance, he traveled across the border into Korea again, to Pyongyang, where he studied hard. In those days, it was not easy being a student. The students would often come out and protest what the Japanese were doing in their country. Sometimes the police would come. Certain students would be beaten with sticks. And some of the students were taken away in chains. And other students were killed. But because Ikwan and his friends knew what they were doing was right, they didn't want to give up. And so they continued to protest, and it was at that time that Ikwan began to hear a song in his heart that went something like this. 뜨거운 마음 바람에 실어 숨막힌 이 땅에 보내노라 정의의 깃발을 휘날리며 자유의 천지를 이루고 지고. Well, it wasn't long after Ikwan and his friends began to protest that wonderful news came to the peninsula of Korea. Their Japanese overlords had been defeated in a great big war. There was dancing and singing in the streets, but not for long. Because Korea didn't have any government of its own, two other big countries came in to see that things ran smoothly. One large country came in to the north, and another to the south. And because those two countries didn't like each other very much, they started to work on the people on their side of Korea, not to like the people on the other side of Korea very much. So I'd like, if you will, to practice or pretend that you were in Korea at that time. And I'll invite everybody on this side of the chapel to look at people at that side of the chapel and scowl at them. And I'd like everybody on this side of the chapel to look at folks at that side of the chapel and growl back. Now don't just wipe that smile off your face. I can see it. Really growl. And that is what it was like in Korea at that time. Before you know it, of course, people were fighting each other and there was a huge war. And when they finished the war, they drew a line right down the center of the country. And everybody on this side of the country and everybody on this side of the country were forbidden from visiting one another, forbidden from writing one another, forbidden from calling one another. And to this day, it is impossible for people on this side of the line to speak to people on that side of the line. So I'd like you to pretend to be in Korea again. And I'd like you to turn in your seats and try and face the opposite side of the chapel. Now just take a moment and think to yourself who it was that you were just growling at a moment before. Probably friends, colleagues. And now, if I were to tell you that at the end of chapel today, half of you would go out one door, and half of you would go out the other door, and that never you could speak to one another again, what would that be like? And think of families who've been divided in this way and are still divided. Okay, you can turn and face one another again. Well, Ikwan by this time had become quite a scholar. And Christine will be interested to know he was a scholar in the Hebrew language. He actually was one of the contributors to this Korean Bible, which is perhaps our English equivalent to the Good News. Ikwan didn't know what to do about the division of his country. But one day as he sat studying his Bible and working on his translations, he came up with an idea. He would walk from one side of Korea, he found himself in the south just by accident, across the line to the north. And he wouldn't stop for anybody, no matter what they said. So after telling his family and friends that this is what he wanted to do, he set out to do it. He started walking over the hills of South Korea until he came to the line. And when he came to the line, there were a number of people with guns and tanks and dark glasses. They said, Ikwan, don't you cross that line. But Ikwan didn't care. He just kept walking. Ikwan, and you can see their trigger fingers itching a bit. Don't cross that line. Ikwan didn't listen. He just kept walking. Past the guns and the tanks, and right across the line. And when he crossed the line, he walked past the guns and tanks on the other side, who were cheering and thumbing their nose at the people on the other side. Ah, he's coming over to us. Ikwan walked over the hills of North Korea until he came to the village where many of his family lived. When the people saw that Ikwan was coming, they ran out of their homes and gave him a great big embrace, and people had tears streaming down their faces because they were so sad that they had been apart for so long and so happy to be reunited again. And at this time, Ikwan heard that song again, a little clearer. And it went like this. After Ikwan had a good visit with his family, he decided it was time to head back to his family on the other side. So he left them again with tears, and he started to walk over the hills of North Korea until he came to the line again, and there were the people still thumbing their noses at one another. On the other side of the line was his family and friends, and they had their arms outstretched, ready to gather Ikwan in when he crossed the line, but he saw some other police officers standing there rather cross-looking, and they didn't seem to want to welcome Ikwan very much at all. Ikwan didn't care. He just kept walking. He stepped right over the line, and his mother reached out to grab him and give him a hug. Before she could, those police came and dragged him off to jail. Ikwan was in jail a long time, and it is said that he was there for so long he didn't get to see his mother alive until because she died while he was in prison. Regardless of the fact that Ikwan had suffered so much, he was not sad at what he had done. He had taught people in Korea that there's not a line in the world or anything at all that can separate us from the people we love. And that in Christ Jesus, two warring peoples can be brought together and united. And for that, Ikwan was an inspiration to many Christians and many people in Korea, and still is to this day. When Ikwan died some years later, thousands and thousands of people gathered to celebrate his life. As they carried his coffin through the streets of Seoul, a friend who was there told me that passing the place where Ikwan had spent many years studying his Hebrew scripts, the clouds opened up, sending down thousands of flakes of pure white snow on the coffin and all who were gathered there. It was a sign of God's blessing. And everyone had a song in their heart that went something like this. And if you ever feel separated from people that you love, or if you ever feel that the world is irreparably torn apart, you might want to try and find that song that Ikwan had in his heart and sing it in your own. And I have good news, because if you want to find that song and sing it in your heart, all you have to do is turn in our own hymn books to number 698 in Voices United. And I invite you to sing it with me now to conclude this story. This is, and perhaps we should sing it in English.